When fame hits, it can send some stars completely off the rails. And that's exactly what happened with many Golden Age actors. Some became so uncontrollable, they abused colleagues and crew members, while others went as far as throwing props at directors. From real-life shootouts to public meltdowns, these 20 old Hollywood men were more dangerous off-camera than on. Stay with us as we reveal the most out-of-control legends Tinseltown ever tried to silence. 1. Errol Flynn. Errol Flynn wasn't just the swashbuckler on screen. He was chaos incarnate off it. With a drink in one hand and a scandal in the other, Flynn's life was a whirlwind of excess. Women, fights, drugs, and legal troubles seemed to orbit him like satellites. In 1942, he was tried for statutory rape, not once, but twice in the same year. Though acquitted, the damage to his image was lasting. But Flynn leaned into his rogue image. He drank until dawn, often showing up on set hungover or belligerent. He once punched a director and allegedly carried a gun in his waistband during drunken nights out in Hollywood. Friends described him as charming one moment, terrifying the next. He partied with gangsters, slept with underage girls, and filmed home movies no studio dared release. He even wrote a memoir called My Wicked, Wicked Ways, a confession so outrageous that critics thought it had to be exaggerated. It wasn't. Flynn lived like there were no rules, and by the time he died at just 50, his liver weighed twice the normal size. Hollywood loved his looks, but feared his unpredictability. Errol Flynn wasn't just dangerous, he made danger look dashing. Lawrence Tierney long before Quentin Tarantino cast him in Reservoir Dogs, Lawrence Tierney was one of Hollywood's most feared hotheads. Known for playing hard-boiled criminals, Tierney didn't need a script to act like one. He was arrested over 50 times in his life, for bar brawls, assault, drunk driving, and once for punching a cab driver so hard the man needed stitches. His temper was volcanic. In 1945, after filming Dillinger, he got into a fight at a Hollywood bar and was arrested again for battery. Studios tried to rehabilitate him, but he kept sabotaging himself. Tierney punched producers, threatened co-stars, and once got fired mid-production for throwing furniture on set. He wasn't just dangerous to others, he was a menace to himself. During one infamous incident in 1951, Tierney crashed his car into a tree while chasing a woman who rejected him. He was often drunk, unpredictable, and completely unmanageable. Hollywood labeled him a liability, and offers dried up. Yet his legend lived on. In the 1990s, when cast as Joe Cabot in Reservoir Dogs, even Tarantino had to restrain him after Tierney started fights with the crew. He was a man who could have been a star, if only he didn't keep acting like the criminals he portrayed. 3. Mickey Rooney America loved Mickey Rooney as the wholesome boy next door, but behind the scenes, he was anything but innocent. Rooney had a notoriously short fuse and lived like a man with nothing to lose. He was married 8 times, fought producers, and had run-ins with gangsters, studio heads, and his own children. At the peak of his fame, he was reportedly caught having affairs with teenage starlets, including Judy Garland. He gambled away millions, assaulted paparazzi, and once chased a journalist with a baseball bat for asking about his love life. He was also deeply entangled in organized crime, owing massive gambling debts to mobsters and allegedly turning to studio heads for protection. At one point, it's said he received death threats from the Chicago outfit after blowing through their cash. On sets, Rooney could be unpredictable, sometimes brilliant, sometimes belligerent. When sober, he delivered electric performances. When not, he was an unstoppable whirlwind of profanity and rage. As he aged, his outbursts turned even darker. In his 80s, he publicly accused family members of elder abuse and financial theft. Mickey Rooney wasn't just a man with demons. He let them run wild. And Hollywood, forever image-conscious, learned it couldn't tame him. 4. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum's sleepy-eyed charm masked a history of defiance and danger. He was one of the first major stars to be busted for drug possession. In 1948, he was arrested during a marijuana raid and sentenced to 60 days in jail. Mitchum shrugged it off, joking that it's just like Palm Springs, but without the riffraff. That devil-may-care attitude masked an intensely rebellious nature. Mitchum had a criminal record long before fame. As a teen, he was arrested for vagrancy, fighting, and being a general menace. He was expelled from school for assaulting teachers and ran away to join hobo camps and carnivals. Even after becoming a Hollywood icon, Mitchum clashed with directors and studios. He once punched a cameraman and insulted a producer so brutally that it delayed the film's release. His relationships with women were just as explosive. Affairs, fights, and jealous confrontations were par for the course. Yet, Mitchum was cool as ice in interviews, dismissing it all with a grin. That's what made him so dangerous. He didn't care about rules, careers, or reputations. He played anti-heroes because he was one. Mitchum was the outlaw the studio system couldn't break, and he wore that like a badge of honor. 5. Sterling Hayden. Sterling Hayden looked like a classic leading man, but inside was a war-torn rebel fueled by alcohol, political rage, and violent self-destruction. A former Marine turned movie star, Hayden hated Hollywood. He once called acting a goddamn stupid business and abandoned fame to become a sailor. But what made him dangerous wasn't just his contempt. It was his volatility. He drank excessively, fought openly with directors, and once smashed a camera during a drunken meltdown on set. He was blacklisted during the McCarthy era and testified before HUAC, naming names, something he deeply regretted. The guilt consumed him. Hayden's emotional turmoil made him unpredictable. He would vanish from sets, sabotage roles, and lash out at producers trying to control him. During one legendary outburst, he reportedly threatened a studio executive with a flare gun aboard his yacht. He was bigger than life and constantly at war with it. Even in The Godfather, he played a character close to his real self, a brooding, conflicted man capable of sudden violence. Sterling Hayden wasn't just out of control. He lived in permanent exile from peace. 6. George Raft. Before cameras ever rolled, George Raft ran errands for Manhattan mobster Oni, the killer Madden, danced in speakeasies, and cultivated lifelong friendships with the feared Frank Costello and Bugsy Siegel. Hollywood adored his menacing authenticity, but those same underworld ties made studios panic. Raft once broke a co-star's jaw for snickering at his Brooklyn accent. Another time he hurled a lighting stand when a director mocked his footwork. The danger wasn't just fists, it was favors. When Siegel opened the Flamingo in Las Vegas, Raft became its smiling front man, quietly steering A-listers toward rigged tables. On set, he carried a .38 revolver for protection, flashing it whenever producers pressured him to take a salary cut. His refusal to play snitches stalled multiple productions. One studio executive later claimed Raft threatened to settle it the New York way if the role wasn't rewritten. Off-duty, Raft cruised Sunset Boulevard in a bulletproof Packard, shadowed by bodyguards who answered to the mob, not the movies. More than once, rival gangsters tried to shake him down. Each time they found studio gates patrolled by men in tailored suits with Chicago accents. George Raft blurred fiction and felony until nobody, least of all Hollywood, could tell where the act ended. 7. Frank Sinatra. Frank Sinatra's velvet voice masked a hair-trigger temper and a Rolodex of underworld contacts that terrified studio chiefs. His rap sheet began in 1938 with an arrest for seduction and grew to include assaulting photographers, threatening columnists, and smashing television sets in drunken rages. At the Beverly Hills Hotel, he once hurled a champagne bottle that shattered inches from Ava Gardner's head, then bribed staff to clean up before police arrived. Sinatra's friendships with Sam Giancana and Lucky Luciano gave him real muscle. When columnist Lee Mortimer called him a Dago crooner, Sinatra broke Mortimer's nose in front of 200 witnesses and still dodged charges. Directors tiptoed on eggshells. One producer insisted on 2 bodyguards not to protect Sinatra from fans, but to protect everyone else from Sinatra. His volatility reached the Capitol Records studio, where missed notes could earn a trumpet player a flying ashtray. During filming of Von Ryan's Express, Sinatra punched a stuntman so hard the man was hospitalized, insisting, "Nobody upstages me in my own picture." Friends swore he could switch from charm to fury in a heartbeat, proving that Old Blue Eyes didn't just command a stage, he dominated every room, sometimes at knuckle point. 8th, Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando revolutionized acting and terrified anyone who tried to corral him. Between takes on a streetcar named Desire, he kept a loaded .45 on his dressing table for inspiration. Crew members recalled him roaring like a caged animal when dialogue displeased him, tearing pages from scripts and ad-libbing obscenities no censor could print. Brando's appetite for chaos was legendary. He rode his motorcycle at breakneck speed down Sunset Strip, once crashing through a restaurant patio and laughing while patrons dove for cover. He kept exotic pets, an injured raccoon, a 3-legged fox that clawed co-stars' costumes. When producers balked at his demands, Brando released a bag of live snakes in the office, declaring, "Now you know how negotiations feel." His personal life was a cyclone. Fistfights with paparazzi, volatile affairs, and a 1990s family tragedy that ended in homicide. Yet he wielded danger with childlike whimsy, mock-threatening the Academy to mail his Oscar to a South Dakota reservation if they didn't address native rights. Hollywood never knew whether Brando would deliver genius or detonate a spectacle, and that uncertainty made him the most thrilling and terrifying talent of his generation. 9. Lee Marvin. Decorated for valor in the Pacific, Lee Marvin carried battlefield demons straight onto sound stages. Alcohol numbed his shrapnel pain and stoked a ferocious temper. He headbutted bargoers, shattered hotel mirrors, and once bit through his own tongue during a bar fight in Big Sur, finishing the brawl before seeking stitches. On the Dirty Dozen, Marvin drank bourbon at dawn to steady the nerves, then improvised brutal stunts that sent stuntmen to hospital beds. He taunted studio medics, joking that morphine tastes like Sunday school punch. When a director ordered a retake, Marvin fired live rounds into the air and barked, "That real enough for you?" His romance with Michelle Triola imploded over guns and gin. She later sued for palimony, a landmark case that still haunts Hollywood contracts. Judges heard tales of Marvin waving a Colt .45 during arguments, daring Triola to pull the trigger first. Off-camera, he drag-raced motorcycles on Mulholland Drive at midnight, challenging rival stars to keep pace or eat asphalt. Lee Marvin fought Nazis on screen, but his real-life battles, fueled by PTSD and booze, made every set a potential war zone. 10th, Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen wasn't nicknamed the King of Cool for composure. His cool was the eye of a hurricane. Abandoned as a child, McQueen chased danger to feel alive. Illegal street races, high-speed police chases, and off-road motorcycle competitions, where he'd ride with broken bones still in casts. Secure in his contracts, he installed clauses allowing him to keep the vehicles he drove, then turned studio backlots into personal racetracks, terrorizing security guards at 100 miles per hour. He carried a switchblade in his boot and a .45 in his car, paranoia stoked by a long-running feud with Charles Manson's biker associates. On The Great Escape, he clashed so violently with director John Sturges over stunt authenticity that filming halted while McQueen cooled off, by hurtling a Triumph across German minefields until military advisors begged him to stop. Drug binges with fellow daredevils ended in fistfights. A Malibu party once devolved into a full-blown brawl after McQueen leapt from a second-story balcony to tackle a man flirting with his date. Yet audiences adored his swagger, the very recklessness that could have killed him at any moment. Steve McQueen sped through life with no brakes, leaving skid marks across Hollywood history. 11. James Kagny. On screen, James Kagny redefined gangster cool with a wink and a punch, but in real life, he was as combustible as the characters he played. Born on the rough streets of New York, Kagny rose through vaudeville by fighting off stagehands, hecklers, and once a drunk stage manager who dared grab his wife. That ferocious loyalty would become his trademark, and his weapon. Though not a habitual criminal like some peers, Kagny was a hot-tempered scrapper who once knocked out a studio executive in the commissary for threatening to cut his pay. He also went toe-to-toe with Warner Brothers over unfair contracts, refusing to work and daring them to sue. He reportedly kept a baseball bat in his dressing room, not for sport, but for self-defense. Off-set, Kagny was known to explode in righteous fury over injustice, especially if someone slighted his friends or tried to cheat the crew. In 1940, rumors swirled that the mob attempted to extort him. Rather than back down, Kagny confronted them head-on, and supposedly got protection from none other than Lucky Luciano. Though never arrested, Kagny's fists and fire made him one of the most feared men on any soundstage. He wasn't just acting tough, he was tough. 12. Humphrey Bogart. Humphrey Bogart brought trench-coated mystery to the screen, but off-screen, he was often a drunken brawler with a sharp tongue and an even sharper backhand. A lifelong heavy drinker, Bogart would down gin at breakfast and challenge friends to drinking contests that sometimes ended in fistfights and police calls. He had a notorious temper, particularly with studio heads. During a contract dispute, he allegedly stormed into Jack Warner's office and threatened to throw him out a window. He was infamous for flipping tables during poker nights, once tossing a glass ashtray at director John Huston for teasing him about a lost hand. Bogart's stormy marriage to actress Mayo Method turned violent and chaotic. They were nicknamed the Battling Bogarts, after police were called to their home multiple times for domestic disturbances. Friends recalled him pulling a gun on a valet who scratched his car, and laughing afterward as if it were a prank. Though beloved by audiences, Bogart's colleagues feared his mood swings and outbursts, especially when he was drinking. His brilliance on screen couldn't disguise the volatility beneath the surface. Bogey wasn't just playing tough guys, he lived like one, and everyone around him bore the bruises to prove it. 13. William Holden. William Holden could light up a screen with raw charisma. But when the cameras stopped rolling, alcohol turned him into a menace. By the 1960s, Holden's addiction had spiraled into chaos. He was arrested multiple times for drunk driving, had public meltdowns at award shows, and destroyed several hotel rooms during booze-fueled rampages. He was known to disappear from sets for days, turning up in Mexico or Texas, bruised and hungover, mumbling excuses. Friends said he'd wake up not knowing where he was or how he got there. On the set of The Wild Bunch, he got into a drunken brawl with the stunt crew, blacking an eye and breaking a nose, his own. But perhaps the most tragic evidence of his volatility was his death. In 1981, after an evening of drinking alone, Holden tripped and struck his head on a nightstand. Too intoxicated to seek help, he bled out over hours. No one found him for days. It was a haunting end to a career that had soared and then staggered under the weight of addiction. William Holden wasn't evil, but his recklessness made him a danger to everyone, including himself. 14. John Garfield. John Garfield brought street smarts and raw intensity to 1940s cinema, but his real-life trouble came from the company he kept. Raised in New York's Lower East Side, Garfield never shed his neighborhood instincts, gambling, hustling, and associating with mob figures long after he made it big. He was known for his defiant attitude toward authority. He once walked off a film set over a minor disagreement with a grip, and he clashed with studio heads over everything from wardrobe to women. During one argument, he hurled a phone through a dressing room mirror and walked out, bloodied and unbothered. Garfield's gambling debts became so serious that mobsters allegedly pressured him to throw a stage performance to settle the score. Even more dangerous was his defiance of the House Un-American Activities Committee. Rather than name names, he refused to testify against his friends, earning himself a blacklist and a death sentence for his career. In 1952, still under FBI surveillance and struggling with high blood pressure and stress, Garfield died of a heart attack at just 39. The autopsy blamed his heart. His friends blamed Hollywood and Washington. He was dangerous not just because of what he did, but because of the truth he refused to betray. 15. Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis had matinee idol looks, but behind that dazzling smile was a volatile, rule-breaking rebel. Known for his wild parties and drug binges, Curtis frequently disappeared on week-long escapades filled with women, LSD, and armed security guards. On more than one occasion, co-stars found him too high to remember his lines, forcing entire productions to shut down until he sobered up. Curtis had a reputation for mood swings and spontaneous violence. During the filming of The Vikings, he got into a screaming match with Kirk Douglas, and nearly came to blows after a dispute over screen time. On another shoot, he headbutted a cinematographer for adjusting his lighting without permission. At home, things weren't calmer. His marriage to Janet Leigh was a turbulent ride of jealousy, infidelity, and smashed furniture. He reportedly once locked himself in the bathroom for 2 days during a fight, emerging with a beard and a butcher knife, quoting Shakespeare. Though he later mellowed out, Curtis was long seen as a powder keg waiting to blow. He glamorized chaos, and Hollywood let him get away with it. For a while. His beauty made him a star, but it was the rage behind the eyes that made him unforgettable. 16. Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed was a one-man wrecking crew who treated movie sets like gladiator pits and hotel bars like war zones. Though British, he tore through Hollywood in the 60s and 70s with an appetite for alcohol, brawling, and scandal that stunned even the most hardened American stars. He drank like it was a competitive sport, downing 126 pints of beer in one session, followed by brandy and 71 whiskeys. The result? Fistfights with strangers, friends, co-stars, anyone who looked at him sideways. On the set of Women in Love, he wrestled co-star Alan Bates nude on camera. But the real clash came later, when they reportedly came to blows over Reed's off-screen behavior. In a London bar, he once stripped naked and fought 5 Royal Marines for calling him soft. He won. Reed's behavior led to numerous bans from restaurants, sets, and airlines. Directors found him brilliant but terrifying, unpredictable, volatile, sometimes violent. During Gladiator, his final film, he died after a drinking binge in Malta, collapsing mid-chug during an arm wrestling contest with sailors. Oliver Reed didn't just play wild men, he was one. His charisma made him a legend. His fury made him feared. He was a walking, drinking, roaring hurricane in human form. 17th. Kirk Douglas commanded the screen with steel-eyed intensity. But off-screen, his drive turned explosive. Known for his ruthless ambition, he bulldozed directors, berated co-stars, and once screamed so violently at a screenwriter that the man fainted. On Paths of Glory, he clashed with Stanley Kubrick, threatening to walk off unless the ending was changed. Kubrick caved. Douglas had a reputation for overpowering every room he entered. His need for control verged on obsessive. If the lighting wasn't flattering, he halted production. If another actor stole a scene, he demanded edits. Rumors persisted that he had mafia ties in the 50s to secure roles and punish rivals, but nothing was ever proven, just whispered in fear. Then there were the darker rumors, whispers of violent affairs, studio silencing, and power plays so aggressive they bordered on psychological warfare. Douglas's charisma masked a ferocity that both propelled and consumed him. To his fans, he was Spartacus. To his colleagues, he was a battlefield. Whether the rumors were truth or myth, one thing was certain. Kirk Douglas didn't just play powerful men. He was one, and everyone in Hollywood knew it. 18. Bert Lancaster. Bert Lancaster was a former circus acrobat who carried that same unpredictable energy into every set he stepped on. As an actor-producer, he demanded absolute control, and when denied, he exploded. Directors who didn't meet his standards were cursed out, shoved, or fired. He once got into a physical fight with a studio executive over a budget dispute, tossing the man against a wall. He had a commanding physical presence and wasn't afraid to use it. On the set of The Professional, he nearly came to blows with Lee Marvin. During Elmer Gantry, he insisted on reshooting a love scene over 30 times, because he didn't like how she looked at him. But Lancaster wasn't just aggressive. He was dangerously persuasive. He could manipulate producers, pressure journalists, and force scripts to be rewritten by sheer intimidation. He was passionate about politics and once threatened to punch a guest at a fundraiser who disagreed with his views. Hollywood respected his talent, but feared his wrath. Lancaster's success came not just from skill, but force of will, and that force could flatten anything, or anyone, in its path. 19th gig. Young Gig Young won an Oscar for They Shoot Horses, don't they? But few knew the storm brewing beneath his polished exterior. A chronic alcoholic with undiagnosed bipolar disorder, Young bounced between brilliance and breakdown. He was hired, then fired, from Blazing Saddles after showing up too drunk to speak. When producers tried to replace him, he pulled a knife on the director. His relationships were equally explosive. He married 5 times, with his final union ending in the most shocking twist of all. In 1978, just 3 weeks after marrying German actress Kim Schmidt, Young shot her in the head and then turned the gun on himself. They were found in their Manhattan apartment with wedding gifts still unopened. Friends had long feared he was spiraling. On sets, he'd vanish for hours, then return slurring and weeping. He punched assistants, broke mirrors, and once attempted to set a script on fire in his trailer. Gig Young's fall was devastating, not just for its violence, but for how far he had once risen. He was a reminder that danger isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it wears a bow tie and smiles. 20th. Tom Neal. Tom Neal had it all. Good looks, leading roles, and Hollywood's attention. But his fists and fury destroyed it all. In 1951, he shocked the nation by nearly killing actor Franchot Tone in a brutal fight over actress Barbara Payton. Neal crushed Tone's cheekbone, fractured his skull, and left him in a coma. The scandal obliterated his career overnight. But Neal's story didn't end there. It spiraled deeper into darkness. His reputation as a violent, jealous man followed him from studios to nightclubs. He was blacklisted, his films forgotten, and his fame reduced to gossip columns and restraining orders. Then came the final chapter. In 1965, he was convicted of manslaughter after shooting his third wife in the back of the head. He claimed it was an accident during a struggle. The jury didn't buy it. Neal was sentenced to 6 years in prison, serving half before fading into obscurity. Of all the dangerous men in Hollywood's golden age, Neal's story is perhaps the most disturbing, not just because of the violence, but because he showed how fame could shield monsters. Until it didn't. These 20 actors weren't just legends. They were liabilities, living on the edge of fame and fury. Their chaos made them unforgettable, but it also left scars on everyone around them. In a town built on illusion, these men proved that sometimes the real danger wasn't in the script, it was in the star.